My name is Carolyn Mayfield. I'm 42, divorced, no kids, and until a year ago, I was living above a flower shop in a cramped one-bedroom that smelled like lavender and regret. Life was quiet, small, manageable, until the day my father, Richard Mayfield, showed up at my door, hands shaking, voice stripped of the steel that once built empires. "I've known for a while, Carolyn," he said, not even bothering to sit. "It's bad. Mayfield Textiles. It's going under." My father, the man who turned a struggling mill in the 80s into a respected name up and down the East Coast. He used to bring home swatches of fabric, teaching me to tell silk from satin by touch alone. He built something lasting. But then the world changed, and he didn't. He refused to go digital, refused to downsize, refused to listen, especially to me. I hadn't worked since college, and not for lack of trying. He didn't think women were cut out for business. Not really. My younger sister, Laya, played the part perfectly, sunny, docile, unthreatening. She married into a reputable family, learned to host dinners and smile prettily in boardrooms. That was enough for him. I was the daughter who questioned, challenged, pushed. So I left. And yet, here he was, asking for help. And despite everything, I said yes. I didn't sleep that first week. I buried myself in ledgers, contracts, vendor lists he hadn't touched in years. The company was dying, not from a single blow, but from 1,000 tiny, ignored wounds. But it wasn't too late. I took a leave from my marketing job and moved into the dusty guest room back at the manor. Laya called it heroic. I called it temporary. 3 months later, we inked the deal that saved Mayfield Textiles. I negotiated with a major retailer to offload our inventory in bulk, trimmed operations to the bone, and ousted half the board. Dead weight still stuck in the 90s. For the first time in decades, Mayfield Textiles turned a profit. The old employees smiled again. Dad threw a dinner party. He raised a glass and toasted me as his lion girl. And for a brief, foolish moment, I believed him. 6 weeks later, he called a family council. Just him, Leia, and me. He cleared his throat, looked at me with that old, expressionless face. "Carolyn, you've done wonders. But the council believes Leia is better suited for long-term leadership." I turned to Leia. She blinked, innocent, practiced, and glanced down at her notes like she'd been rehearsing this scene since we were kids. I didn't speak, just nodded. My hands were trembling under the table. "And of course," he added, "you'll still receive your bonus." A bonus. Like I was an intern who brought coffee and lucked into a win. I walked out of the room without a word, but I wasn't finished, not even close. I stayed at the manor 2 more nights, not because I wanted to, because I needed to see. People always assume silence means surrender. It doesn't. Sometimes it means you're calculating. That first night I sat in the lobby. Laya appeared in one of our mother's old silk dresses, wineglass in hand like it was a natural extension of her body. She didn't flinch at the sight of me. She smiled. "Don't take it personally, Curl," she said sweetly. "Dad trusts me to carry the vision forward. You're brilliant, but you don't fit here. That syrupy poison she's been feeding me since childhood." I wanted to ask her, "What vision?" But I didn't. Instead, I spent the next day shadowing her from a distance, watching. She held brief meetings, called everyone dear and beloved. The male department heads smiled at her, charmed, but none of them actually listened. They nodded, then went off and did whatever they wanted. She was ornamental, untouched and unchallenged. Meanwhile, I was making quiet calls. I still had my contact list, vendors, consultants, junior execs, people who owed me, or at least remembered how I'd pulled them from the fire. That night, I stumbled across an old filing cabinet in the East Wing. Dusty. Forgotten. Inside were contracts, client records, investment logs, and something else. A document. Signed by Richard and our late Uncle Joseph. Mayfield Holdings, LLC. A dormant subsidiary created during a short-lived expansion in the early 2000s, then shelved. Still technically under Mayfield Textiles, but with its own structure, its own account, and, with a little maneuvering, a path I could take without violating any NDAs or bonus clauses. I didn't smile with joy, just recognition. My father thought he was playing chess, but he'd left the king exposed. The next morning, I packed my bags, left the estate without a goodbye. On the train back to the city, I made one call. Ely Loner, this is Carolyn Mayfield. I need help launching a discreet consulting firm, and I've got a proposition I think you'll want to hear. Ely Loner Smith, once CFO of our fiercest competitor, until she was ousted for being too bold, too sharp. Exactly the kind of woman I need at my side. We had lunch once, years ago, after a conference. Over coffee and something forgettable, she leaned in and said, "If you ever need to burn something down, I'll bring the matches." She laughed when I reminded her. "Ah, Carolyn," she said, "I was waiting for your call." We met at a low-lit wine bar just off Lexington. Eleonora looked exactly as I remembered. Eyes like scalpels, posture like a blade. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I've already reviewed the corporate structure of Mayfield Holdings," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "You were smart not to dissolve it. It's gathering dust, but it's intact. And more importantly, so is the tax shield." For the next hour, we sketched the outline of a quiet war. Mayfield Holdings would be reborn, not as a manufacturer, but as a strategic consulting firm. Eleonora brought in her network, logistics, procurement, textile design. I had supplier relationships and old contracts from my time resuscitating Mayfield Textiles. Together, we'd undermine the very foundation my father and sister thought was secure. We wouldn't target their clients directly, not yet. We'd move in the shadows, whispers in back rooms, quiet nudges in supply chains, the margins where real power lives. But I couldn't let go of the question still knotted in my chest. Why? Why had my father chosen her? That night, I found the answer, or a hint of it. In a box of old letters, tucked between tax forms and brittle photographs, was a birthday card. No scent, just neat italics. "She won't say it, but she's proud of you. Your father doesn't understand girls like you. Too smart, too fast. He was raised to believe daughters should smile, not lead." The words hit harder than I expected. I remembered being 10, clutching my science trophy at dinner, waiting for his praise. He barely glanced up, but when Laya came home with a ribbon from her school play, he clapped until his palms turned red. It wasn't her fault. She gave him what he wanted. But knowing that didn't soften the sting. The next morning, I looked Eleonora in the eye and said, "I don't want to destroy them. I want to be undeniable." She raised an eyebrow. "That's the best kind of revenge, the kind that lingers." We got to work. Our hires were quiet. Remote analysts, freelance procurement consultants. No glitz, no noise, just surgical precision. And then came our first hit. Valenti Textiles, the Italian manufacturer I'd worked with during the Mayfield recovery, chose not to renew its contract. Laya never followed up. I was drinking espresso in Milan when I met with Giovanni Valente. "I'm back," I told him. "Smaller scale, sharper focus." He didn't blink. "You're the reason we got paid on time last year. We work with you." And just like that, our first client signed on. I didn't tell my father, or Laya, but I knew it wouldn't take long before they felt the tremors underfoot. 2 weeks later, we signed a distribution consulting deal with a Canadian startup, one Mayfield had snubbed months earlier. Eleonora called it low fruit. I called it missed opportunity. That same month, we landed 3 more mid-tier contracts. Small ripples, but ripples grow. Then came the invitation, the Regional Trade Summit in Bastogne. Mayfield Textiles had been chosen to speak on a panel, Innovation in Legacy Brands. Laya was the featured speaker. Eleonora and I would be attending as part of the newly reborn Mayfield Holdings. It was too perfect to resist. I want her to see me, I told Eleonora. Not out of spite, just so she remembers I still exist. Eleonora smirked. You want her to wonder how you got here. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I kept turning over memories like stones. I was 13. Dad had taken Laya to the golf course with one of his partners. I waited at the window for hours, dressed in khakis and a collared shirt, hopeful. When he returned, tanned and cheerful, he said, You wouldn't have liked it, sweetheart. Too boring for someone like you. Too much for someone like him. At the summit, Laya looked polished but tight, her smile strained. I watched her from the back row as she delivered lukewarm sound bites about honoring tradition and embracing innovation. Some people nodded. Others scrolled through their phones. Then a journalist asked about Valenti Textiles' sudden withdrawal. Laya blinked. We parted ways due to strategic differences. Her left hand twitched. Later, in the hallway, she spotted me. Her face stiffened. Carolyn, she said, like my name was something she'd bitten down on by mistake. I didn't realize you were still involved. I'm not, I replied coolly. I'm expanding. Her eyes narrowed. She was calculating. Dad doesn't like surprises. He'll adjust, I said. He's had practice. That night, Eleonora and I toasted with champagne in our hotel room. I don't think she knows yet, she said. Not completely. She will. And by then, I said, she'll be reacting, not leading. The next morning, I received an email from Alan Ridge, Mayfield's former accountant. He wanted to meet, said he had something to share. I didn't know what he'd found, but I had a feeling the cracks were just beginning to show. Alan Ridge insisted we meet in person. Of our own accord, he said. We chose a corner booth in a downtown cafe, the kind of place that hummed just loud enough to muffle secrets. He looked older than I remembered, worn thin, guilt etched into the lines around his mouth. I never wanted any part of this, he said without ceremony, but I needed the paycheck. He slid a folder across the table like it might bite. Inside, spreadsheets, emails, signed authorizations. Some were forged, some weren't. All of it, lies. Laya had been bleeding the company dry, slowly, surgically, by funneling funds to a West Coast marketing firm run by her husband's cousin. Overbilling, duplicate payments, all signed off by her. I blinked. She's laundering money. She'd call it an outsourcing partnership, Alan said, voice low. But yes, in practice, it's exsanguination, quiet and constant, and no one on the board's even looking. He stirred his coffee, not drinking it. Your father signs whatever she puts in front of him. Why are you telling me this now? He looked down. Because when you came back, I thought maybe there was someone left who actually gave a damn. Laya's not evil, just reckless. She doesn't see where this leads. I walked home clutching the folder like a live grenade. For the next 3 days, I combed through every document. Eleanor double-checked the patterns. The damage wasn't catastrophic yet, but it was enough. Enough to trigger an audit. Enough to bury Mayfield Textiles under a landslide of negligence. She leaned back in her chair, brow furrowed. We could go public with this. Not yet, I said. I want to give her a choice. You think she'll make the right one? Number, I think she'll panic. I wrote a letter, not to Laya, but to Paul Kern, one of the few board members I still respected. Old school, quiet, principled. I enclosed copies of 3 doctored invoices and requested a meeting. I didn't sign it with my current title. I signed it Carolyn Mayfield, former strategic advisor. I wanted them to remember who once pulled them back from the brink. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at an old photo of my mother. She was laughing, one of the rare ones. I couldn't remember what had made her smile like that. I whispered into the stillness, asking if I was doing the right thing. No answer, just the muted sounds of the city outside my window. The next morning, Paul Kern called. Caroline, he said, thank you for not going to the press. We met in a boardroom filled with the kind of men my father had always trusted, slow-moving, pale, polished. Paul held the folder like it was radioactive. I'll admit, he said, I didn't believe it at first, but I read the documents. You're not wrong. I let him sit with the truth. He exhaled sharply. She's clever, he said. Not brilliant, but clever enough. She knows just how much to move without raising flags. And Richard, he signs everything. Lately, he doesn't even read it. Why? I asked softly. Why is he so blind? Paul sighed and leaned back. Because he's tired. Because after your mother died, he clung to whatever didn't challenge him. Laya became his mirror. You, Caroline, you've always been his storm. That one landed, because it was true. I'm not asking you to kick her out, I said. I just want the bleeding to stop. Paul nodded. Let me handle this internally. Quiet inquiries, third-party verification. But Carolyn, this won't stay quiet forever. Later that week, Eleanor and I sat cross-legged in her loft, reviewing vendor logs for the 3rd time. What if Paul backs down? She asked. What if he gets scared? Then we escalate, I said, but not until I'm sure Laya won't try to fix this by throwing someone else under the bus. Eleanor paused, then quietly, I know what that feels like. She told me about her old job, how she uncovered financial misconduct, reported it, and was swiftly shoved out by the same men who had once praised her for being sharp. They called her divisive, too emotional, too proud. I spent 5 years proving I wasn't crazy, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Helping you, this feels like redemption. I reached across the table and took her hand. You're not crazy, I said. You're necessary. Meanwhile, the industry had started to buzz. A trade blog mentioned a consulting firm quietly upending supplier negotiations. A procurement director told a colleague he was going where the real thinkers were. Behind the glass walls of Mayfield, Laya had started to panic, but that wasn't enough. I wasn't just waiting for the house to fall, I was preparing to replace it. 3 days after my meeting with Paul, Mayfield Textiles issued a vague clarification to partners about internal accounting practices. The language was classic corporate, flat, ambiguous, utterly forgettable. Eleanor read it over lunch and chuckled. It's always funny when people sense the fire but can't see where the smoke's coming from. Paul, true to his word, initiated a discreet third-party review, unannounced, but already rattling nerves inside Mayfield's inner circle. And Laya, reportedly furious. She called it a witch hunt, claimed someone on the inside was out to sabotage her. According to Alan, the staff were walking on eggshells. Then came the invitation. Richard's birthday, a formal dinner at the estate. I hadn't been invited to anything like this in years. I stared at the ivory envelope as if it might bite. "Are you going?" Eleanor asked. "I have to," I said. "He'll tell me everything I need to know." And so I was late. On purpose. The dining room was a museum of old names, Richard's friends, former clients, board members in finely tailored suits. Laya was there, draped in emerald green, sipping wine and pretending her world wasn't in free fall. Her smile when she saw me was a scalpel. "I didn't expect to see you," she said through gritted teeth. "I'm hard to get rid of," I replied. Richard stood at the head of the table. He looked older, faded, not worn but dimmed, his voice cracking as he raised a glass. "Family. Loyalty." The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and bitter. After dinner, Paul pulled me into the hallway. "They're getting nervous," he said. The auditors had already uncovered enough to justify action. He paused. "Give it a few more days. Once they confirm everything, there's no going back." Laya found me just as I was slipping on my coat. Her eyes were glassy, sharp, desperate and dangerous. "You think you've won something, don't you?" "I'm not playing to win," I said. "I'm playing to survive." She stepped closer, almost whispering. "He'll never choose you, Carolyn, no matter what you prove." I smiled. He doesn't have to. I left without saying goodbye to Richard. Back in town, I sat across from Eleanor at her kitchen table. "We're close," I said, "but we need one last move, something that makes the board look at me and finally see the future." She looked at me, quiet. "You want them to see you the way your father never did." I shook my head. "Number, I want them to see the truth and regret ever turning away." By Monday morning, the audit report was sitting on Paul Kern's desk. By Wednesday, 3 more board members had read it. By Friday, Barking was called into an emergency executive session. Richard was invited. Paul told me quietly, "They want him isolated. He's too compromised." Eleanor and I were already 3 steps ahead. We finalized the presentation, 20 slides, clean and precise. No bitterness, just data, patterns, solutions. And the final slide, 3 simple words in a stark serif font. We start again. "I'm not burning the house down," I told Eleanor. "I'm rebuilding the foundation." She nodded. "Just make sure they see it, before she sets it all on fire." Laya didn't go quietly. She tried to pin the blame on her CFO first, then on a junior consultant who hadn't even been with the company long enough to tie her own shoes, let alone forge a paper trail. Next came the conspiracy theory. Rival firms were out to sabotage Mayfield's resurgence. But the board had the documents, the money trail, her signature. When Richard was finally told, he reportedly sat in silence for 10 full minutes. Then he said, "She meant well." That one sentence told me everything I needed to know. On Monday morning, I was invited to address the board. I didn't walk in with revenge. I walked in with clarity. The room was still. Most of them couldn't meet my eyes. Paul gave me the smallest of nods. "I'm not here to tear anyone down," I began. "I'm here because this company has a future, but only if it stops pretending the past is enough." I outlined a restructuring plan, a new model, a vision that brought Mayfield Holdings under my wing, with modern systems, ethical leadership, and digital precision. I didn't name Barking. I didn't need to. When I finished, no one applauded, but no one objected either. "We'll discuss," said Helen Rice, a woman who once refused to shake my hand at a conference. Outside in the hallway, Richard was waiting. He looked smaller than I remembered, paler, shoulders bent under invisible weight. "You think you proved something?" he said, his voice brittle. I didn't prove, I said. I built. He shook his head slowly. You don't understand loyalty. No, I said. I understand that silence is betrayal. You called it loyalty. I call it fear. And I'm not afraid of you anymore. He didn't reply. That night, Eleanor popped open a bottle of champagne. To the end, she said. I hesitated, then raised my glass. The board took 48 hours. Wednesday morning, Paul called. They voted, he said. 7-2, in favor. I stood there in my kitchen, phone in hand, staring out the window. A woman jogged past with her dog. Somewhere, a bus rumbled down Main Street. Laya, I knew, was reading the same letter I had just received. They're removing her? I asked. They're calling it a change in leadership, Paul said. They've offered her a counselor role, just formality. And my father? Paul hesitated. He didn't object. He didn't speak. I wasn't surprised. He wouldn't fight me, but he wouldn't stand beside me either. He'd vanished behind the legacy he built, too ashamed to admit he nearly destroyed it. 10 minutes later, Eleanor came in with bagels and black coffee. I slid my laptop across the table, showed her the email. She read it twice, then smirked. You did it. No, I said. We did. I walked into the Mayfield building that morning not as a daughter, not as a ghost, but as a leader. Some employees averted their eyes when I passed. Others gave cautious nods, as if sensing a shift in the air. I greeted each one by name. No grand speeches, no theatrics, just purpose. I took the elevator straight to the executive floor. Laya was already packing. She didn't look surprised to see me. Your father didn't even call, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. After everything I did for him? Sometimes, I replied, we give everything to people who were never capable of giving anything back. She studied me for a long time. Do you think I'm the villain in all this? No, I said. I think you were handed a throne you never earned and convinced yourself it was always yours. She zipped her bag, slow and deliberate. For what it's worth, she said, I was always jealous of you. You made Daddy uncomfortable. I just wanted to make him proud. Then she left. That night, I sat alone in the CEO's office. First it was his, then hers, now mine. I opened the bottom drawer and found it, a brass key worn smooth by time. I knew it immediately. It belonged to my mother's hope chest, the one she kept in the attic, filled with dreams that never made it past the design stage. Letters, blueprints, a children's fabric line she never launched. I took the key in my palm and held it tight. That night, I called Eleanor. I want to build something in her name, I said. Something quiet, but solid. Eleanor was silent for a moment. Then, with quiet certainty, you finally have the power to do that. And all I know is people. My first week as CEO wasn't a victory lap. It was triage. The books were a mess. The staff was skittish. The board watched me like a fragile experiment they weren't sure would hold. I didn't break. I listened. I sat down with every department head, not in boardrooms, but in their offices. I asked what was broken, what they'd been too afraid to say. They told me. I wrote it all down. Eleanor worked beside me every night. She had given up her formal role, but her fingerprints were everywhere. In our forecasts, in the language of our new initiatives, in the culture we began stitching together piece by piece. One evening, after finalizing a vendor agreement under our new ethical sourcing policy, she looked at me across the table. You don't just want to run Mayfield, she said. You want to change it. I nodded. If all I'm doing is keeping the machine running, then what does any of it mean? A week later, I climbed into the attic. The air was heavy with dust and unspent dreams. I found the hope chest, still locked. I slid the brass key in. It turned with a click that felt like a door swinging open inside me. Inside were fabrics, soft, whimsical, hand-drawn designs with stories woven through the seams. My mother's vision, a world where children wore magic. I brought it all into the office and laid the designs across the conference table. Staff passing by slowed, then stopped. One designer, Rosa, touched the pages and burst into tears. "She was ahead of her time," she whispered. "She just ran out of it," I said. That afternoon, I announced the Elise collection, named for my mother, updated by our team based on her original sketches. A portion of the profits would fund scholarships for women in low-income communities entering textile design. The board approved it unanimously. Richard never came to see it. But a week later, a letter arrived. No return address, no signature. I still don't understand you. But I was wrong. As far as I'm concerned, it wasn't an apology, but it was enough. Laya moved to Seattle. I heard she started a boutique firm with her husband. She never reached out. I never expected her to. On launch day, Eleanor stood beside me. We hosted the first Elise collection show in a small downtown gallery. No pomp, no flash, just clients, friends, and a legacy reborn. "I used to think burning it all down was the only way to be seen," I said. Eleanor smiled. "And now?" "Now I think building something better is louder." I looked around the room, the fabric swatches displayed like stained glass, the soft hum of conversation, the Mayfield name on the wall. It no longer cast a shadow. It stood on its own. "I didn't take anything from them," I said aloud. "I became everything they thought I couldn't." And for the first time, I believed it.